Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is January 14, 2022. This weekend, we got a lot of content about COVID. I got at least 6 articles coming up. They range from more details about long COVID to government policy to student and teacher walkouts and strikes. I got to say, this is a depressing week. Last Monday, there were over a million. It was, I think, 1.1 million cases in a single day. This Monday, 1. I think 47 million, so about 1.5 million cases in a single day. Meanwhile, in the capitalist media, it's nothing but false promises and lies. Oh, it's peaking, everything's going to be fine. You don't even, need to wear an N95 mask. First of all, yes, you do need to wear an N95 mask because COVID is airborne. Anyway, I have previously done kind of like long compound COVID videos. This weekend, there are just so many different threads that I decided to break it up into separate videos. So without further ado, let's get into this video's topic. We're going to do an article from the American Prospect titled Fire Jeff Zients. A lot of my questions have revolved around who specifically is giving these suggestions for such awful policy. We know that it's generally in capitalists' interests to try to keep profits up, and they do that primarily at workers' expense. But this is really beyond the pale. Where exactly is this coming from? Who knew what and when? Because they could be doing more while still protecting capitalist profits. Let's put it that way. So looking at this article, this is by Daniel Boguslav from January 13, 2022. It's titled Fire Jeff Zients. The tagline is Biden's COVID czar has gone from Mr. Fix-It to Grim Reaper, steering the administration's pandemic response to catastrophic lows. So basically this guy, Jeff Zients, is like the COVID-19 response coordinator guy. So really, what we're seeing with Omicron, they're not even trying. I just saw something yesterday. The CDC is making cruise ship COVID requirements voluntary. I don't even know what to say about that. They're not even trying. Anyway, so this article apparently was written in partnership with the Revolving Door Project, which scrutinizes the executive branch and presidential power. Okay, so let's get into the article. During the Biden transition, Dennis McDonough, Barack Obama's chief of staff and President Biden's current Secretary of Veterans Affairs, was bullish on the new administration's soon-to-be COVID czar. He described Jeffrey Zients, then a member of the transition team, to the New York Times as, quote, the ultimate firefighter. He runs into the burning buildings. He doesn't ask why. He doesn't ask when. He doesn't ask who's going with him. 1 year later, McDonough's description has proven correct for all the wrong reasons. A year into his role as White House coronavirus response coordinator, essentially the logistics man for federal COVID-19 policy implementation, including coordinating federal supply chains for masks, tests, and other key equipment, the country faces death tolls that Biden promised on the campaign trail would never exist under his administration. Amid an entirely predictable viral mutation and a winter surge, Zients has failed to provide the materials necessary to improve the U.S. response, or the guidance necessary to keep the pandemic under control. He's proven himself not up to the task, and Biden should relieve him of his duties. Zients' most important power, as COVID czar, is his ability to invoke the Defense Production Act, a power Biden delegated to Zients personally via executive order, as my colleague Timi Awayemi documented last month. The DPA allows the president to order the nation's private sector to produce specific materials necessary for national safety, and it has been used by both Trump and Biden for COVID-related materials before. With DPA powers legally entrusted to Zients, a mass mobilization unseen since the Second World War was potentially at his fingertips. He could have spent the year mobilizing against a shared enemy in the virus, stockpiling enough personal protective equipment, PPE, and pharmaceutical products to protect the public. But Zients has, for the most part, abdicated this responsibility. Most damning among Zients' failures is his refusal to allocate resources to aid vaccination efforts abroad. As Vice News reported this week, Tito's Vodka has donated more towards efforts to mass produce an open source global vaccine than the White House. Comment. So, yeah, that is an actual vodka company. Basically, a guy named, I think, Peter Hotep, MD, has, and there's another researcher, I can't remember the name, that one just stuck with me. They're basically working on an open source vaccine. They're kind of like, it's a little sketchy, open, like human trialing it in India right now. But anyway, yeah. So I think out of the $5 million of funding on that open source global vaccine, this vodka company donated 1 million or 20% of it. So this is the kind of situation we're in. Libertarian dystopia. Continuing. Global vaccine distribution is not only a humanitarian requirement, but also a critical step to preventing the development of new variants. Comment. Yeah, it is likely, I believe, that Delta came out of India, which of course is a poor country. They didn't have the vaccine coverage, and lots of people are getting sick. And every time somebody gets sick with COVID, the COVID replicates in their body. I mean, it's the same with any virus. And every time that a virus replicates, there's the possibility of mutation. Many mutations don't confer advantage to the virus. They may even confer disadvantage, or they just may go nowhere. But once in a while, and it only takes once in a while, they give the virus significant advantage, and you get a new dominant world strain. Bottom line, you don't want to give the virus the opportunity to reproduce. You want it to die out, basically. And that is not what's happening. Back to the article. But doing so, distributing vaccines globally, would have required angering powerful forces in corporate America. In an economy in which so many of the highest valued corporations exist by exploiting flaws in our intellectual property system, such as Microsoft, Apple, Big Pharma, Disney, forcing Moderna to share their vaccine recipe, and compelling mass production sites across the world would have engendered corporate backlash. If the government cast aside patents for COVID vaccines, could software or movies be next? I mean, no, but anyway. Following this corporate line of thought and disregarding the necessity of vaccinating the world, Zients has not pushed domestic vaccine manufacturing capacity in this direction. And while President Biden endorsed waiving IP rights on vaccines last April, there's been no movement since on that front. Comment. The Biden administration, particularly if you go back to 2020 and look at all the things that Kamala and Joe Biden were talking about, it is just this litany of unfulfilled promises. I mean, they were just saying anything, and they've done nothing. Continuing. The DPA is not only necessary to addressing catastrophic shortfalls of vaccine across the globe, but could have been used to manufacture masks and tests with wartime vigor, distributing them quickly and equitably to the American populace. For example, regardless of the debate raging over in-person schooling, it's incontestable that schools must have easy access to high-quality masks and tests to minimize risks. We have a strategic reserve of petroleum. Why not of PPE? Somehow, the imperative to distribute this critical equipment slipped through the cracks. As Vanity Fair reported last month, actual epidemiologists pleaded with the Biden COVID team to ramp up rapid test production and distribution back in October to head off needless infection and death at December family gatherings. Entirely predictable. The Biden team sloughed them off, and given the nature of the request, that almost certainly means Zients was responsible for the rejection. The result of this oversight has been twisting vaccine testing lines that recall the Depression of the 30s instead of the wartime mobilization of the 40s. Months later, after Americans pilloried Biden spokesperson Jen Psaki for laughing off the suggestion of mailing COVID tests to every American, Biden said he wished he had thought of the idea sooner. Comment. It is not an oversight. It is literally the most obvious thing. That you have a seasonal rise in disease every winter is common sense. It's like a basic public health epidemiological fact. Also, more people die in the winter than die in the summer. This is also a basic public health fact. Also, even with respect to the pandemic, there was a giant surge last winter. Why? Because people are indoors breathing recycled air and COVID is airborne. This is all obvious. And anyone, with the kind of information that Zients had access to, this isn't an oversight that's deliberate. I don't know why it's deliberate specifically, but to say that they didn't have the information is just absurd. And so along the same lines, Biden saying he wished he had thought of the idea sooner. I mean, like any country that the US considers on its kind of level of development is doing exactly that. So, the idea that just nobody had thought of this is absurd. Also, speaking of Jen Psaki, it's hard to keep up with all the developments, but she just yesterday, she got destroyed on Twitter for this. She said to a reporter, "Well, Biden might be unpopular, but we could do a policy of puppies and ice cream for everybody. Maybe that would be more popular." This is how they talk about the basic health and safety of the people in the United States. Is like, "Oh yeah, you want to live? Yeah, I'd like a puppy." Well, I don't know. Maybe you're unqualified even to lead capitalism. It's just a thought. Anyway, continuing. Zients' failures are not only a result of his passive refusal to use the immense powers at his disposal to combat the crisis. They are also the result of intentional, all right, here we go, actions to head off effective strategies. Zients instructed Republican Vermont Governor Phil Scott, for example, against enacting a mask mandate, despite the policy's high favorability and effectiveness. I'm going to have to follow up with that. If they don't in this article, there's a link to another. Why in the world would you recommend against a mask mandate? That's insanity. Okay, actually, I say that, and that is my gut reaction is like, what? What are you thinking? Actually, and I said that in my last couple of COVID videos, like, why is there no mask mandate? Because it makes absolutely no sense. I think I heard the first convincing reason of why they might not be doing a mask mandate. Long story short, they're thinking that if Omicron is, quote, milder, unfortunately it isn't. It's maybe slightly less severe than Delta, but more severe than the original COVID. Anyway, they're fearing future variants, and so they're trying to expose everybody now to Omicron. This is a huge, probably fruitless gamble, though, because any natural immunity, along with the vaccine immunity, which, get the vaccine. I really wish we had better vaccines, though, because even that coverage wears off after 6 or 8 or 10 months. So, some countries are going to like 4 or 5 months to get a booster shot. I'm sorry, but that's really, it's better than nothing. It's way, way, way better than nothing. Get the shot. But this just isn't like a sustainable strategy at all, let alone deliberately giving people Omicron. That's a whole other level, and we'll talk about that in another video. But that's the first convincing, plausible, it's still inhuman, but the first plausible explanation of like lazy eugenicist public health policy of like, well, maybe if we just give everyone the disease, then anyway, that's the first thing that kind of clicked with me because it makes absolutely no sense from any other standpoint. All right, continuing with this article. Zients isn't a public health expert. He's a former corporate executive whose track record bolsters the worst possible impulses for a Biden appointee in command of the federal government's resources. He cut his teeth at Bain Capital, the private equity firm Barack Obama ran against in 2012. Remember, Mitt Romney was a Bain Capital guy, which has erased pensions and health benefits for tens of thousands over decades of leveraged buyouts. Then he made a name for himself running a pair of management consultancies where he advised CEOs to be blunt with their employees. Quote, "The social contract is never coming back, and your employees know it." Okay. All right. So this is a guy who believes in just open, unrestricted class warfare, no class peace, no social contract, all against all. This is a libertarian dystopia right here, and it's in the Democratic Party. All right. Another Obama-era grifter, Rahm Emanuel, hit on the key to Zients' success when he glowingly described him and his cohort, including Vivek Kundra and Anish Chopra, as, quote, the McKinsey boys, for their slash-and-burn mentality toward government bureaucracy and spending under the auspices of managerial sagacity, or wisdom. Zients' personal playbook has long revolved around parachuting into high-profile operational quagmires, hiring experienced software engineers, and then grandstanding over their work. Zients first claimed credit for saving Obama's Cash for Clunkers website, paying Oracle even more money to fix a problem they themselves created, and then again for hiring engineers to fix the catastrophic healthcare.gov rollout. As engineers fixed protocols behind the scenes, Zients brought them pie, watched them work, then placed a national cover story celebrating his own genius. Meanwhile, negative coverage of Zients has been handily dealt with. Before his appointment to the Biden administration, his Wikipedia page was scrubbed of damaging details by political consultancy Saguaro Strategies. The conjurers of the Zients charm offensive include the Washington Post editorial board, a paper his friend Donald Graham once helped to run, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, David Bradley, Zients' former business partner, Atlantic media partner, and National Journal owner, and Obama officials like Rahm Emanuel and McDonough. But overcoming the unprecedented challenges of the pandemic has demanded far more complexity than increasing server capacity and maintaining close connections to the Fourth Estate. Zients' only public health experience before his appointment was as CEO of Cranemere, a Berkshire Hathaway-style investment firm, where he personally secured a majority stake in an anesthesia firm that engaged in the same kind of surprise billing the administration is now thankfully moving to ban. Zients has failed to listen to the public health experts, urging him to do anything other than warn unvaccinated Americans about their impending doom. Quote, for the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm, unquote, Zients said at a December press conference. The comment quickly drew backlash from both the left and the right. So commenting, is the COVID response under Biden making a little more sense now? You have like a psychopath like this running it, obviously on behalf of, a psychopathic class, but this is it. It's unmitigated. It's like, why isn't the TV working? And you take off the top and it's like there's a bunch of, gerbils running around in there chewing on stuff. That's what you've got here. This is a disaster. This is a nightmare scenario. Having failed to enact effective policy outside of vaccine production, Zients has left the virus to run its course, charging ahead with a domestic strategy based on little more than hope that enough people will take vaccines to resolve the nation's ongoing nightmare. And commenting, yes, it is absolutely the kind of policy you would expect to see from someone with no training in biology, medicine, or public health. It makes no sense at all. With the highly mutated Omicron variant tearing through the population and not enough Americans receiving booster shots that ensure full protections, comment, full protections for a few months before it starts to decline really significantly, I might add, Zients and the White House COVID team continue to ignore America's new reality. As the Mr. Fix-It moniker deepens in irony with each passing day, Zients continues to broadcast spite and doom toward not only the unvaccinated, but also critical Biden allies like teachers' unions, students, the disabled, and a vast workforce that, thanks to revised CDC quarantine guidelines, are being forced back to work under life-threatening conditions. Quote, this is not a moment to panic because we know how to protect people and we have the tools to do it, Zients told reporters in December, quote, but we need the American people to do their part to protect themselves, their children, and their communities, unquote. So, actually, commenting here, you need an N95 mask mandate. Like, not just China, but European countries are doing that. This isn't like something exclusive to like communist-led countries. This is the laziest strategy you could possibly imagine. I mean, while still doing something at least. you're doing something, but it's the absolute, well, it's not the bare minimum. It's the bare minimum of effort to register effort on the chart. It's not the bare minimum to like do something effective. They're doing far less than the bare minimum on that. Vaccines are great for reducing your odds of getting the worst symptoms, though you may still get them, but your odds will be lower. Your protection will be that much better against the more severe symptoms, or your odds of getting the most severe symptoms. But it really doesn't do that much for transmission, at least not in the first week or so, because in vaccinated and unvaccinated people, viral load is still high in the first days. It's just that in the vaccinated people, or people who have some natural immunity, whatever, your body has the antibodies to deal with the virus more effectively. So after day 6 or 7, the vaccinated people, people whose immune systems are one way or another trained to deal with the virus, you're going to fight off that virus more quickly. So your viral load will drop and you'll be less contagious than an unvaccinated or otherwise, immune naive person. But just like that's not enough really to significantly reduce transition. It is airborne as an aerosol, so you need N95 masks. You need HEPA air filtration. You need all these things that are not being done. So anyway, continuing. On Tuesday, reports emerged that the Biden administration may finally be heeding a bipartisan call to distribute high-grade respirators to hospitals. Even Donald Trump's former Surgeon General joined in the call for a basic mitigation measure. As Politico reported this week, Zients was unconvinced. What? And was still, quote, vetting the idea. Who's paying this? Like, does this guy not have a boss? What's going on here? In 2020, the Washington Post editorial board rejected the Revolving Door Project's concerns over Zients' background, claiming that, quote, Mr. Biden needs to resist ideological pressure to exclude people with business backgrounds and think instead about how he can maximize input from people with relevant experience in every sense of the term, unquote. Yeah, but that's not relevant. Anyway, Jeff Zients has now demonstrated just how irrelevant his experience is. It's now time for Biden to resist the ideological pressure, to maintain appointees with strong business connections and weak policy records. It's time to fire Jeff Zients. End of article. I would add, it's time to get in your time machine and go back and never hire him in the first place. What were you thinking? I know it's the Democratic Party. I know you're fucking awful. But like, this is a bridge too far, I think, even for your own base. I'm a socialist, so obviously I'm not going to like most of what you do. But Biden's approval rating is tanking right now. Although let me say one other thing. We saw a headline, I think it was last week, about Macron in France, taking the exact same strategy of just trying to, quote, piss off the unvaccinated. That gets you fucking nowhere. So it does seem that this is a drive on behalf of international capitalists. It's a somewhat coordinated effort. There's some resistance in particular countries to it. But this definitely seems to be a kind of drive, and people like Zients are just saboteurs installed into high-level positions to enact the policies of these kind of slash and burn, Gordon Gekko, break the company and then sell it off for parts kind of mentality. People have got to get it through their heads. The fucking Democratic Party is not harm reduction. We're way past that point. Way past. Get with it. The fundamental task, and I've said this a million times, the fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break completely with the Democratic Party and with all capitalist political parties. We need to organize independent of the 1% and the political parties that they control. That definitely includes the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders led a gigantic movement. He filled stadiums everywhere he went, and then he fed that movement into the Democratic Party where it cannot be effective. We need to pursue every avenue of class struggle that we possibly can. We need to experiment with what works, and you cannot do that kind of experimentation and, exploration of different avenues of struggle while you're also trying to support this fucking behemoth of corporate power. You absolutely cannot do that. You do not pull them left, they pull you right, they muzzle you, they silence you. This is what happens every time. You got to cut the ties with the Democratic Party. Literally, until this is done, nothing else can happen, honestly. Until we get people out of the Democratic Party and organized independently as a class for working class power, we just can't do anything else. You want a progressive agenda? Yes, so do I. The Democrats are never going to get it. They're going to stand in the way. They're going to stamp it out. They're full of people like Jeff Zients, and I don't know what else I need to say. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. What do you think? If you have a question or a comment, leave it in the comment area below. We always have a good discussion. Comments are moderated, so feel free to post any kind of question as long as it's sincere. You won't get dogpiled, I promise. Otherwise, thanks for listening. More COVID content coming, so check back frequently for that. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Every donation is encouraging. They're also all materially helpful, so thank you very much for those. It's encouraging, keeps me doing this, and it's very much appreciated. If you'd like to help out without making a donation, click like, subscribe, leave a comment, even if it's just thanks or good video. All of that helps to boost the channel, as well as sharing it on your social media. All of this helps to expand the audience and to expand the conversation about capitalism and socialism. Back in the real world, join an organization, or at least consider making a contribution to one if you're not ready to join. My suggestions are to look for something in your area that's active, doing useful work, responds promptly when you contact them with questions, generally seems to just have their act together. You know, you can have the best politics on paper. If the group is dysfunctional in practice, it's going to actually be a huge drain on your life getting involved. So check it out first and do whatever you can. Ultimately, we do need to organize, so this is a key step. Otherwise, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.